the thing that carried me through the storm. I woke up on the side of a Forest Service road, 4 miles from where I disappeared. My leg was shattered. My rifle was gone. And in the snow around me, search and rescue found tracks that didn't belong to any animal they could identify. I still don't have an explanation for any of it. 3 years later, I still don't. I'm 42 years old. I've hunted these mountains in Montana for over 30 years. I'm not a man who sees things that aren't there. And I'm not telling you this story for attention. I've turned down 2 podcasts and a cable show that wanted to film a reenactment. For years, I didn't tell anyone outside my own family. But I think the not telling has cost me something. So here it is. This happened 3 years ago, high in the Absaroka-Beartooth country, above 7,000 feet. I'm not going to give you the exact drainage. You'll understand why by the end. What I can tell you is that I went into those mountains a confident, experienced hunter, the kind of man who's hunted these slopes since he was 9 years old. And less than 24 hours later, I was lying in a hospital bed, trying to explain to a search and rescue coordinator why I'd been found in a place that should have been physically impossible for me to reach. He didn't have an answer. Neither do I. Not really. But I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, in order, the way I remember it. And I want you to ask yourself the same question I have every single day for 3 years. What actually carried me out of that ravine? The morning it started. I left my truck a little after 6:40 that morning. Normal pullout. Forecast calling for 6 to 10 inches overnight. Nothing I hadn't handled before in 30 years of hunting this country. Rifle. Bivy sack. Map and compass. I don't trust GPS alone up there. Not since a battery died on me years earlier and taught me a hard lesson. I told my wife exactly where I was parking and when to expect me back. I texted her from the trailhead, the last bar of signal I'd get all day. That text still exists, with a timestamp. It matters later, more than I could have known standing there that morning. By 9, I cut a fresh elk track. A single bull, walking, unspooked, maybe an hour ahead of me. Any hunter will tell you what that does to a man's morning. The whole world narrows down to the next print in the snow. I followed that bull for hours. He took me over a saddle I'd never crossed, into a basin I didn't recognize at all. That was the moment everything changed, and I didn't even notice it happening. I wouldn't understand how badly until it was already too late to turn back. At the time, I had no idea how far that one decision was about to take me, or what was already starting to gather in the storm behind me. The sky turns. By early afternoon, the sky did something I'd only seen 3 or 4 times in my entire life. Low, fast clouds with a strange yellow-green cast. Every time I'd seen that color before, it meant the forecast was wrong. This time was no different. By 2, it was snowing hard. By 3, the wind hit 40, 50 miles an hour. I lost the elk track in 20 minutes. I stopped caring about the bull entirely. I cared about one thing: getting back over that saddle before I lost the light, along with everything else. Visibility didn't just get bad, it went total. There were moments out there where I genuinely could not see my own boots. I did the right thing. I pulled my compass and backtracked the bearing I remembered from crossing that saddle. I did not panic. I told myself I'd be at my truck a few hours late. Cold, humbled. Fine. That is not what happened. And what I walked into next is the part search and rescue still can't fully explain: the fall. I walked that bearing for what felt like 40 minutes, though in a whiteout, time stops meaning anything. It could have been 20. It could have been 90. The wind was a constant roar, the kind that makes you put your head down and just survive the next 10 feet. I hit a slope I didn't recognize. That's when the real fear started, the kind that has nothing to do with cold. I should have hit the saddle by then. Instead, I was on a slope, dropping away into nothing, with no landmark I could place. I made a call I've replayed 1,000 times since. Drop off the ridge into what I hoped was timber, where I could navigate trunk to trunk, staying oriented by feel. It was a reasonable decision. Search and rescue later told me it was the right instinct, just executed in country that didn't cooperate. What I didn't know, because I couldn't see 10 feet ahead, was that the slope fell into a rocky drainage with a sheer drop on one side. The kind of terrain feature that doesn't show up as dangerous until you're already committed to it. One step, the snow was under my boot. The next step, there was nothing. I fell 18 feet onto broken rock with a thin crust of snow over it. I hit hard, and I felt my leg go in a way I will never forget for the rest of my life. It wasn't a clean break. It was a deep, grinding wrongness above the ankle. When I tried to put weight on it, white light blew across my vision. I've broken bones before, a wrist, a couple ribs, separately over the years. This was worse than both combined. A displaced tibia fracture, with fibula damage too. I didn't know the medical terms yet. I just knew my leg would not hold me, and I was alone at the bottom of a ravine that didn't exist on any mental map I had. And the light was already starting to fail. What happened in that ravine over the next few hours is the part of this story I still have the hardest time explaining. Not because I don't remember it, because I do. The numbers. I'm not going to pretend I didn't think about dying right then. I did the math the way you do when you've spent your life in these mountains and you know exactly what they're capable of. Temperature dropping. Wind chill already below zero and getting worse. No ability to walk out. No signal on my phone. I checked anyway, out of habit more than hope, and got nothing, which I expected. My wife wouldn't even know I was overdue until well after dark. And even then, nobody puts a helicopter up in conditions like that. Nobody walks a ground team into a whiteout at night. If anyone was coming for me, it would be tomorrow at the earliest. Possibly the day after. At the time, I genuinely believed that math meant I wasn't getting out of that ravine alive. I want you to hold on to that, because it's going to matter for what I'm about to tell you. I did the things you're trained to do. I got into my bivy sack, which is awkward and slow, with a badly broken leg and hands that barely worked anymore. I wrapped the emergency blanket around that. I dragged myself a few feet at a time to build some kind of windbreak out of the rocks around me, which was its own kind of agony I won't dwell on. I ate some of my food because your body needs fuel to make heat. Most people think you should save it, but in cold survival, you eat what you have. My fire kit was soaked from the fall. No flame, no heat, but whatever my own body could still generate. By full dark, the wind hadn't let up. If anything, it had gotten worse. I remember the sound of it most of all, not just noise, but something that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the mountain itself was breathing. I thought about my wife. I thought about my 2 kids. I'm not going to dress that up with anything poetic. I just thought about them, plainly, the way a man does when he genuinely believes he isn't getting up again. I thought about the conversation my wife would have to have with our kids, the one where she'd have to find the right words for why I wasn't coming home from a mountain I'd hunted my whole life. I made what peace I could with that, lying in a ravine in the dark, with my leg broken and the storm doing everything it could to finish the job. I want you to remember that feeling, because everything that happened after it is the reason I'm still here to tell you about my wife and my kids at all. That's the state I was in when I noticed something I didn't think much of at the time. The wind had a rhythm to it by then. Gust, lull, gust, lull. The pattern you get used to after enough hours in a storm. But in one of those lulls, for just a second, I thought I heard the lull go quiet, in a way wind doesn't go quiet. Like something had stepped into the gap and was holding still. I told myself it was nothing. I'd been telling myself a lot of things were nothing by that point in the night. That's the state I was in when I heard something that didn't belong to the wind. The sound. I want to be precise here, because precision is the only thing I have to offer you as proof. Precision is exactly what gets lost when stories like this one get retold too many times. Snow makes a particular sound when something heavy moves through it. Not a crunch, exactly. A deep, compressed sound, different from the lighter crunching of a deer or even an elk. I'd heard moose and bear move through deep snow before. This was heavier than either. Slower. Deliberate. Long pauses between sounds, like something taking its time despite the storm. My first thought was grizzly. We have grizzlies in that part of the Absaroka-Beartooth, and even though most would be denning up by late November, a young boar or a sow having trouble finding a den site isn't impossible. That thought sharpened my fear into something almost familiar, a danger I understood. I've carried bear spray and a rifle into grizzly country my whole adult life. I dragged my rifle out from where it landed in the fall, working the bolt with hands that barely functioned from the cold. I want you to understand the position I was in, flat in a ravine, in a whiteout, where I genuinely could not see more than a few feet, with a weapon I wasn't sure I could even aim properly. The footsteps got closer. Slow. Heavy. Long pauses. 10 or 15 seconds of nothing but wind. Then more of those heavy compressions in the snow, closer than before. I called out. I knew that was the wrong move if it really was a bear. I did it anyway, because some animal part of my brain needed to know what was out there, more than it needed to follow protocol. Nothing answered. The footsteps stopped completely. For a long stretch after that, there was nothing. Just wind. I told myself I'd imagined it, that hypothermia plays tricks on a man's senses, that I was deep enough into the cold by then, that I couldn't fully trust my own perception. I almost believed that. Then I saw it. And once I saw it, the grizzly theory didn't survive another 10 seconds. What I saw first. It's not pure black inside a blizzard at night. Snow holds and scatters whatever ambient light exists. Moonlight through cloud. Sometimes just the strange glow heavy snowfall seems to carry on its own. So what I was looking into wasn't darkness. It was a kind of moving gray static, snow driven sideways in sheets. And against that static, for one moment, something solid appeared. It was upright. That's the first thing that struck me as wrong for a bear. A bear rises onto its hind legs for a few seconds at most to look over brush or size up a threat. It doesn't hold that posture. This thing held it. Walking. Clearly bipedal, not the rolling shuffle lurch you get from a bear standing, because that posture isn't natural for them. 25 feet away. In that storm, that's nothing at all. I'm 6'1". I've field-dressed enough elk and bear over the years to have a practiced eye for size and mass on a living thing, even half out of my mind with fear. Because that kind of assessment gets written into your nervous system, whether you want it there or not. This thing was taller than me by a significant margin. I'm not going to give you a confident number. Estimating height through blowing snow at night, in shock from a broken leg, isn't science. I want to be honest about that. But the mass was unmistakable, built wide through the chest and shoulders in a way that matched nothing I knew. Not an animal, and not a man in heavy winter gear either. I want to address that directly, because I know it's the first thing a skeptical viewer will think. I've spent a career around big men in serious expedition clothing. This wasn't that. The proportions were wrong for a person. The shoulders too wide relative to the head, which seemed almost small for the body, sitting low with seemingly no real neck at all. It made no sound I could separate from the wind. No roar, no grunt I could swear to. I've heard plenty of accounts on channels like this one describe screaming, charging, all of it. I don't have that for you. What I had was silence from the creature itself, and a tremendous amount of noise from the storm around us both. I did not raise my rifle. I know how that sounds for an experienced hunter staring at something that size, that close in the dark. The honest truth is, I was past rational thinking by then. Hours of cold exposure, the shock of the fall, blood loss from the leg injury that turned out to be significant enough, by the time anyone examined me later, to be a contributing factor in my overall condition. It did not charge. That's the part I need you to sit with, because everything our culture trains us to expect from a monster encounter is a charge, a roar, an attack. There was none of that. It stood there for what I'd guess was 10 or 15 seconds, an eternity at that distance. And it did not move toward me with any aggression at all. If anything, the posture read like assessment, the way a man pauses at the edge of a campsite he didn't expect to find occupied. Then it started walking toward me, and I felt something other than the cold for the first time since the fall. Whatever happened in the next 60 seconds is the part of this story that changed everything I believed about what's actually living in those mountains. The close look. I'd rather tell this part plainly than dress it up with anything that sounds like I'm trying to convince you of more than I actually experienced. It crossed the last of the distance in a few steps, close enough that even through the blowing snow, I could see texture, not just silhouette. The body was covered in a thick, dark coat, not sleek like a bear's winter coat, but coarser, longer in places, matted in others from the wet snow. There was a smell. I want to mention it because every account I've ever read mentions a smell, and I always wondered if that was exaggeration. It wasn't, in my case. Something heavy and wild, not unlike a bear den, but with something else underneath it. I don't have a good comparison for. It crouched down, not all the way, but enough to bring whatever served as a face down closer to my level. For 1 or 2 seconds, no more, I had the clearest look I'd get the entire night. I'm not going to invent details I'm not sure of. I did not get a clean, well-lit look at a face the way you'd want for a positive identification. What I can tell you is that the eyes, dark, deep-set under a heavy brow ridge, held something that did not read to me as predatory. I know exactly how that sounds. I know the monster looked gentle is the kind of line that makes people roll their eyes at stories like this. I'm telling you what I perceived, half frozen and in shock, for whatever that testimony is worth to you. Then it reached down, and it picked me up. What happened over the next several hours still doesn't sit right in my memory, no matter how many times I walk through it. The part that still doesn't make sense. I've turned the mechanics of this over in my mind for 3 years, and I still can't fully explain it. I was in a bivy sack, wrapped in an emergency blanket, with a badly broken leg, lying on rock and snow in a ravine. Lifting a grown man, dead weight, off uneven ground, with a serious injury, without causing him to scream from pain, takes either enormous strength used with real care, or enormous strength and no care at all, where the person being lifted happens to get lucky. I felt a jolt of pain when my leg moved. I'm not telling you it was painless, but I wasn't dropped. I wasn't jostled the way an animal handles prey it intends to kill or carry off. I was held against what I believe was its chest and one arm, cradled more than slung, my bad leg supported instead of left to hang and swing with each step. People always ask me why I didn't fight, why I didn't scream. The honest answer is, I didn't have anything left to fight with. I was already drifting in and out of consciousness from blood loss and cold before any of this started. What I remember of being carried comes back in fragments, not a continuous scene. The way a dream returns to you in pieces rather than as a film you watched, start to finish. I remember the sensation of movement, rhythmic, steady, much smoother than I would have expected, given how violently the storm was still raging around us. Snow streaking sideways across my face. The wind changing pitch as we moved, sometimes muffled, like we dropped into a sheltered line of trees, sometimes screaming back up to full force, like we'd come back out into open ground. At one point, I looked up and saw nothing but white movement against black sky. No stars, no moon, nothing to orient by except the steady motion of whatever was carrying me. Then there's a gap. I genuinely cannot account for a stretch of time during that carry. No memory at all. I'm not going to invent anything to fill it. I don't know how long it lasted. I don't know what happened during it. What I remember next, clearly enough that I trust it more than the rest, is a sensation of being set down. Not dropped. Set down, with the same deliberate care I'd felt being picked up. The ground felt different from the rocky ravine floor. Flatter. More even. Packed harder. The way snow gets on a road that's seen traffic, even in a storm like that. In the last clear moment before I lost consciousness again, and this time for what would turn out to be several hours, I looked up one more time. The shape was still there, a short distance off, standing still, watching. Then the dark closed back over everything, and I went under. I did not see it leave. I did not hear it leave. When I come back to full awareness, hours later, it was simply gone, and I was alone in the snow, and the wind, while still blowing, had dropped to something survivable. Years later, one of the search and rescue volunteers who worked my case told me something that never made it into the official report. I'm gonna get to that. But first, You need to understand exactly where I woke up, because the location alone is something nobody has ever been able to explain. The road. When real consciousness came back, hours later, I was lying on the shoulder of a road I recognized. Eventually, once the light came up, gray and thin through the last of the storm. Not the road near my truck, a completely different one, serving a different drainage altogether. One I had hiked exactly twice in my life, both times years earlier. And here's the number that nobody, not me, not search and rescue, not a single wilderness medicine professional I've spoken with since, has ever been able to explain. 4 miles. That was the straight-line distance between my truck and where I woke up. 4 miles of terrain that included a substantial drainage and a ridge climb, in conditions that had made it impossible for me to navigate, even with a compass and 20 years of experience. I could not have walked that distance. I want to say that as plainly as I can. My leg was useless. I tried putting weight on it that morning, instinctively, the way you do, and the pain nearly took me back into unconsciousness. There is no version of those hours where I dragged myself, or hopped, or crawled 4 miles across that terrain in a whiteout, at night, with the injuries I had. I've turned this over with 3 different people who know that country and know wilderness medicine, and every one of them has told me the same thing without my needing to push them toward an answer. It isn't possible. Not for me, not for anyone, not in those conditions with that injury. I had enough presence of mind, once I came around, to know I needed to make myself visible. I didn't have my rifle anymore. To this day, I don't know what happened to it. Whether I lost it during the fall, during the carry, or at some point I have no memory of. Here's the part that still bothers me about that. My pack was still on me when they found me. Straps tight, buckles fastened, nothing torn or loose. The sling on that rifle was old leather, worn soft from 15 years of use, and it had never once slipped off my shoulder in all that time. Not even when I was climbing, not even in wind. I don't have an explanation for how it came off me without anything else on my body coming loose with it. I had my whistle, still clipped where it always is on my pack strap. I blew it in intervals, 3 short blasts, pause, repeat, with whatever strength I had left. A logging contractor running a plow attachment on that road heard it a little after 8 that morning. I remember his face when he got close enough to see me clearly. "Jesus, how long you been out here?" he said. I didn't have an answer. I genuinely didn't know. What I did know, lying there waiting for help, was that I was 4 miles from my truck, with a shattered leg and no rifle. And I had no idea, yet, just how much stranger that math was about to get. What search and rescue found my wife had called it in the night before, the moment I missed my check-in, exactly as I'd told her to if I was ever overdue. Teams were already preparing to search the drainage near my truck, the only place they had any reason to look. They were still mobilizing toward that location when the call came in that I'd already been found, alive, 4 miles away, in a different drainage entirely. I was told later that this caused real confusion. Some of the responding teams genuinely wondered if there'd been a mix-up, if I was actually a different missing person, because the location made so little sense given where I'd started. I spent 11 days in the hospital. Surgical repair on the leg, plates, screws, the whole thing, on top of hypothermia complications, including frostbite on my fingers, that came closer to amputation than I like to think about. I'd lost enough blood that I needed a transfusion. One of the doctors, a guy I'll always remember for his bluntness, told me that, based on my condition coming in, I shouldn't have survived a full night of exposure at that elevation, in that storm, with those injuries. He didn't know the rest of what I'm telling you here. He was just talking about the cold. A search and rescue coordinator interviewed me in the hospital a few days later. Partly procedure, partly because the location discrepancy clearly bothered him. I did not tell him about the creature. I was exhausted, in pain, on medication, and I knew exactly how it would sound. I told him I had no clear memory of how I ended up where I was found. That was, strictly speaking, true. It just wasn't complete. But here's what is on the official record, not just my word. And it's the part of this story that even the most skeptical person I've told has struggled to wave away. Investigators noted unusual tracks in the snow near where I was found, partially obscured by the storm's tail end and the contractor's plow work, but documented before they were lost entirely. The tracks were large, significantly larger than any boot print, and the stride length was long in a way that didn't match a man walking, even a tall man. I want to be careful here, because tracks in snow degrade fast. Nobody made a plaster cast. Nobody brought in a specialist to measure them, because at the time, nobody treated it as anything other than an odd detail in an otherwise successful rescue. A man was found alive. That was the headline. The tracks were mentioned once in an internal report, then forgotten by everyone except me, and a couple of the people who saw them firsthand. There was never an official explanation for the 4 miles, or the missing rifle, which I never recovered and still can't account for to this day. That alone should have been the strangest part of this story. It wasn't. The standard language in these reports covers it: disorientation, possible periods of unconscious movement, the unreliable nature of injured person self-reporting. I don't say that with bitterness. I think search and rescue did everything right, by their own standards and procedures. There was simply no box on that form for what I actually believe happened to me. And there's still the thing I told you I'd come back to. What that one volunteer said to me years later, that never made it into any of this paperwork. Why I'm telling you now. I didn't tell my wife the full version for almost a year. We were lying awake one night when the subject of that storm came up the way it sometimes still does between us, and I finally just said it. I didn't tell anyone outside my family for much longer than that. Part of it was fear of how I'd be seen, by huntin' buddies, by guys I respected, eventually by my own kids, if some garbled version ever reached them. Part of it, honestly, was that I wasn't sure I trusted my own memory of that night, given everything my body and brain were going through at the time. What changed it in the end was a phone call I got almost 2 years after the rescue from one of the search and rescue volunteers who'd been on the periphery of my case. He told me he'd never put it in writing because there was no way to write it up that wouldn't get him laughed out of the department. But he said, when his team walked that section of road the morning after I was found, before the contractor's plow had cleared the last of it, he saw a second set of those large tracks, heading away from the road, back up into the timber, alone. No human tracks alongside them. Nothing leading toward the road that direction at all. In other words, whatever made those tracks didn't walk out to that road beside me and then leave. It left from where it had set me down, and it went back the way it came. There was one more thing he told me, and it's the detail I still think about more than any other. The depth of those tracks wasn't even. Heavier going one direction, lighter coming back. The kind of difference you'd expect from a man carrying a sack of feed out to a barn and walking back empty-handed. He'd seen that exact pattern before, working ranches as a kid. He said he didn't want to say it out loud to his team that morning, but the tracks read like something carrying weight on the way in and carrying nothing on the way out. He'd kept that to himself for 2 years before he ever told me. I understood exactly why. That call didn't give me certainty. What it gave me was permission to stop pretending I had a clean explanation and just tell you what actually happened. I've held every alternative explanation up against my own account, with the same weight I hold my own memory. Hypothermic hallucination is real, and I was deep enough into it that I can't rule it out completely, even now. That's the honest version of this story, and I owe you the honest version. But every wilderness medicine professional I've described this to says the same thing without me pushing them toward it. A man with a displaced tibia fracture does not cross 4 miles of that terrain in that storm with no memory of doing it. Not by dragging himself. Not on adrenaline. It isn't possible. I've spent 30 years reading sign in those mountains. I know exactly what a freezing, half-conscious mind can manufacture, and I take that seriously every time I tell this story. I also know, as well as I know anything, the difference between an animal track and a human boot print. And the people who saw what was left in that snow near the road that morning told me, without my asking them to, that what they saw was neither. I don't need you to believe me. I've made peace with the fact that this story will sound, to most people watching, like exactly the kind of thing a man's mind builds to make sense of something that should have killed him and didn't. Maybe that's all it is. I think about that possibility more than people probably expect, given that I'm the one telling the story. But I was there for the part that can't be measured or photographed. And in the last clear moment before I went under that night, watching that shape stand a short distance away, still, watching back, it didn't feel like menace. And it didn't feel like an accident of geography. Whatever carried me through that storm knew exactly where it was taking me.